The Earl of Lemongrab says he is fine. He says it inside his own castle, in a voice that is not the voice of someone who is fine. He says it while sitting on a throne, too large for his body, in a room he has filled with copies of himself that he does not look at, in a kingdom where he has decreed that the punishment for almost every conceivable infraction is 1 million years in the dungeon. He says he is fine, and the show holds on him for an extra beat, just long enough for the listener to register that nobody in the room believes him, including him. His hands are shaking. His mouth is doing the small, involuntary thing it does when the volume of what he is feeling exceeds what the architecture of his face can express. He is fine. He is in chemical pain. Both of those things are true at the same time, and the show is not going to step in to tell you which one to trust. This is the kind of contradiction that Adventure Time spent 10 years building entire characters around. A figure stands in front of you and tells you one thing about themselves, and their body, their habitat, their entire visual design tells you something different. And the gap between those two reports is where the character actually lives. Lemongrab is the most obvious version of this, because Lemongrab is the most obviously broken. The seams of his construction are visible from across the room. He was made wrong. He knows he was made wrong. He has built a life out of trying to issue commands loud enough to drown out the fact that he was made wrong. And the show, with a kind of clinical patience that almost no other animated program of its era is willing to extend to its comic relief antagonists, keeps coming back to him to show what it looks like when a person realizes their own existence is the result of someone else's mistake. This essay is about that, but not just about him. It is about a pattern that runs through almost every significant character in Adventure Time. The thesis is this: every important character in the land of Ooo is a survivor of someone else's failed experiment. The show's character design philosophy is iatrogenic, a medical word that means harm caused by the very attempt to heal, and it is one of the most consistent, most under-discussed structural decisions in the history of American animation. Princess Bubblegum makes Lemongrab, and Lemongrab is in pain. Finn lets his grass sword make a copy of him, and the copy becomes Fern. The Lich is killed and reborn as Sweet Pea and grows up sweet specifically because someone else absorbed the wound. The Mushroom War creates Susan Strong. The Crown creates Ice King. Hunson Abadier's whole biological nature creates the precise shape of Marceline's grief. Margles dies on Mars, and Magic Man becomes the man who exists afterward. Princess Bubblegum splits off Nettie because some of her had to remain soft, and the rest of her could not afford to. These characters are not standalone designs. They are the residue of something somebody else tried to do, and the show, episode after episode after episode, treats them with the seriousness of damage rather than the levity of cartoons. Welcome to Tome. Get comfortable. This one goes deep. Let us get into it. There's a moment in Season 5 where Princess Bubblegum is sitting in her laboratory and the door is locked and the candles are low and she is looking at a fresh batch of candy people she has just brought to life. And the listener is meant to register that this is a routine for her. She makes people. She has made people for a very long time. The Candy Kingdom is a population built by hand, one body at a time, by the same scientist who is also their ruler. And the strangeness of that situation is something the show is willing to let sit in the background of almost every episode that takes place in her territory. You see candy children. You see candy parents. You see a candy mailman and a candy butler, and a candy guardian and a candy banana man with very few thoughts in his head. None of them were born. All of them were assembled. The maker is in the building. The maker is the queen. The maker is also the only person in Ooo who knows what each of them is actually for. Lemongrab is what happens when she gets the recipe wrong. He is introduced in Season 3 in an episode called Too Young, which aired on the 11th of July in the year 2011. The premise is light. Princess Bubblegum has been temporarily de-aged into a 13-year-old and has lost the legal authority to govern her own kingdom, and so an heir is summoned to take the throne in her absence. The heir is Lemongrab. The heir, it becomes immediately clear, is not okay. He arrives in a tall body with a sour face. He cannot regulate his volume. He cannot regulate his proximity to other people. He cannot regulate his emotional response to almost anything that happens around him. His response to disagreement is to shriek the word unacceptable, and his response to mild inconvenience is to declare punishments measured in millions of years in the dungeon. The episode is funny. The audience laughs. The voice that John Cassier uses for Lemongrab is a piece of comic invention so specific that it became one of the show's most recognizable sounds. And underneath the comedy, the episode is doing something that almost nobody on first viewing notices, which is establishing the basic clinical fact about Lemongrab that the show will return to and develop for the next 5 seasons. He is in pain. Not metaphorical pain, not symbolic pain. Chemical, physiological, in-the-body pain. The behavioral read is consistent across every appearance he ever makes. He flinches at sound. He squints at light. He cannot tolerate touch. He cannot tolerate being looked at for too long. He cannot tolerate being in rooms that have too many other minds in them. His outbursts are not the outbursts of someone who is choosing to be cruel. They are the outbursts of someone whose nervous system is constantly registering ordinary stimuli as overwhelming, and whose only available tool for trying to push that stimulus away is volume. He is not loud because he is rude. He is loud because the world is loud first, and he is matching it with the only instrument he was given. Princess Bubblegum knows this. She has always known this. She made him. In the same episode where she introduces him, she explains that he was an experiment she stopped working on because she added too much lemon to the recipe. That sentence is delivered as a joke. The show frames it as a joke. The audience receives it as a joke. And the joke is also, when stated plainly, an admission that the queen of the Candy Kingdom is a scientist who created a sentient being whose entire chemical composition is unbalanced, whose every waking minute is spent inside a body that does not work, and that she decided this was a manageable failure and put him in a castle far enough away from her main kingdom that she would not have to look at him every day. Think about what that actually means. This is not a fairy tale king who was cursed by a witch. This is not a tragic prince whose nature is the result of fate. This is a person who was made by another person, on purpose, for a specific civic function, and the person who made him got the proportions wrong. And instead of correcting the error or terminating the experiment, the maker decided to file the experiment away in a remote location and hope it would be quiet. He was not quiet. He was never going to be quiet. He was, from the first moment of his existence, the visible evidence of his maker's mistake. And the show is patient enough to follow that thread for the rest of its run. The follow-up episode is called You Made Me, in Season 4, Episode 36. It aired on the 2nd of September in the year 2013. The premise is that the Candy Kingdom has a population surplus problem, and Princess Bubblegum decides to send the surplus citizens to live under Lemongrab's rule in his distant castle. She delivers them to him. She tells him they are his now. She leaves. And the moment she leaves is the moment that the show finally lets the listener see what Lemongrab's interior life has been like for the entire time he has been alive. He turns to one of the candy people she has dropped off and asks if she will come back. The candy person does not know. He says that he has been alone. He says it in the kind of voice that nobody had heard from him before, because the voice he had used in his first episode was the voice of a magistrate enforcing order. And this new voice is the voice of a child trying to figure out whether the parent who left him is going to remember he exists. He has not been ruling. He has been waiting. The castle has been empty. The decrees about 1 million years in the dungeon were issued to an audience of no one, in rooms where nobody had walked in months. And the show, by showing him sitting on his throne in a hall that has been so silent that the arrival of a small population of citizens feels to him like a religious event, is making one of the quietest and most devastating points it ever makes about him. He was not made to be alone. He was made and then left alone. Those are different things. And the difference is the entire weight of his character. The episode goes on. He tries to be a good ruler. He tries in his way. He invents a song to sing with his new citizens. He gives them lessons. He attempts to build a community out of people who, like him, were assembled in a laboratory and shipped to a building far from their maker. The song is off-key. The lessons are too loud. The community he tries to build keeps breaking apart because he cannot regulate the volume of his own affection. And the same nervous system that makes ordinary sound intolerable to him also makes ordinary tenderness explode out of him in shapes that nobody else can receive. He loves them. He cannot reach them. He keeps trying. The episode lets you watch him try. And then his brother arrives. The Earl of Lemongrab II, or Lemongrab II as the credits eventually call him, is introduced as the result of one of Lemongrab I's attempts at making the loneliness more bearable. He is a clone. He is meant to be company. He is, in the immediate term, exactly what Lemongrab I has been missing for his entire life, because he is the first being he ever meets whose chemistry matches his own. They eat together, they sing together, they patrol the kingdom together. They are, for a few brief episodes, the happiest the show ever shows Lemongrab being, and the show is careful to point out that the happiness is not based on any improvement to his original condition. He is still in pain. He still cannot tolerate ordinary stimuli. He still issues decrees that no other ruler in U would consider remotely proportionate. The only thing that has changed is that there is now somebody in the room with him whose nervous system reads the world the same way his does. And that company is enough, for a while, to make the world bearable. The show is not subtle about what it is doing here. Lemongrab is not a comic villain who needs to be defeated. Lemongrab is a person who was assembled wrong, abandoned by his maker, left in a castle to scream at empty rooms for years, and is briefly and partially relieved of the worst of his suffering by the presence of a copy of himself. That is the plot. That is the story. And the show treats it with a level of seriousness that almost no other animated comedy of its era is willing to extend to a character who was originally introduced as a one-episode joke. The brothers reign together for some time. The kingdom under their joint rule is strange. It is described by visitors from the Candy Kingdom proper as an unsettling place. The citizens are anxious. The food is odd. The rules are arbitrary. But the rules are at least consistent, and the brothers are at least content. And the show frames the visiting candy people's discomfort as their own failure of empathy, rather than as evidence that the Lemongrab kingdom is doing something wrong. The visitors are accustomed to Princess Bubblegum's order. The brothers offer a different order. It is the order of two people who were never properly calibrated, doing their best to run a small civilization on whatever calibration they can manage. The show is willing to call that an achievement, and then the show takes it away. The episode is called All Your Fault, Season 5, Episode 30. It aired on the 11th of August in the year 2013. The premise is that something has gone wrong in the Lemongrab Kingdom. The candy people Princess Bubblegum sent there are starving. The food has been depleted. The order has frayed. She visits to investigate and discovers that Lemongrab 1 has done something the show, again, frames as a joke, and which, when stated plainly, is an act of desperation by a person whose entire life has been a study in mismanagement of resources he never asked to be in charge of. He has eaten his brother. The show frames this lightly. Lemongrab 2 has been reabsorbed back into Lemongrab 1. The only being who ever made him bearable is gone, and the way Lemongrab 1 explains it is that he was hungry. He was hungry, and his brother was nearby, and the boundary between an external companion and an internal source of nutrition was, for a person whose entire chemistry has never made sense to him, never as firm as it would have been for somebody else. He ate him. He cannot get him back. He is, after the episode ends, alone in a different way than he was before, because now he has the memory of company. And now he has the knowledge of what he is capable of doing to the thing that gave him company. And the show holds on his face while Princess Bubblegum yells at him about the citizens he has failed. She tells him this is all his fault. The episode is named after that line. That is the gap. That is the whole gap. The maker who abandoned him in the castle, who left him alone for years, who made him with bad chemistry to begin with and then walked away, is now telling him that the chaos that has emerged from his attempt to manage the situation she dropped on him is something that he caused. The episode is willing to let her say that. The show is not going to step in to correct her. Lemongrab is going to absorb the accusation, the way he has absorbed every other thing that has ever been done to him, and the listener is going to be the one who has to do the math. Whose fault is it really? The show does not answer that question out loud. It does not need to. The accumulated evidence has been laid down across multiple episodes. He was made wrong. He was abandoned. He was given a population he was not equipped to manage. He found one piece of relief in his brother, and that relief was unsustainable for reasons internal to the design choices his maker made in the first place. The fault, in any honest reading of the situation, traces back to the laboratory where Princess Bubblegum stirred too much lemon into the recipe, and then, instead of pouring out the batch, let it walk away on its own legs. This is not a fairy tale. This is a story about a person who was created by another person, treated as a defective product by the creator, sent away to manage the consequences of his own defect, and then blamed for the consequences when they came due. And the show, by letting Princess Bubblegum say that line in that voice, in the room where he can hear it, is showing the listener something about her that the listener might not have wanted to see. She is the queen. She is also somebody who blames the failed experiment for the failure. There is a final Lemongrab story. He gets one more substantial appearance in Season 6, Episode 37, an episode called Lemon Hope Part 1, and its continuation, Lemon Hope Part 2, Season 6, Episode 38. They aired on the 3rd of November in the year 2014. By this point, Lemongrab 1 has multiplied. He has made more lemon people. He has built, in his castle, a kingdom of his own kind. All of them as miscalibrated as he is. All of them under his rule. And the rule has hardened into something that, from the outside, looks like a dictatorship. Citizens are punished for small infractions. A young lemon child named Lemon Hope is kept under particularly close watch. The kingdom has lost whatever fragile balance it had under the two brothers and has tipped, under the weight of one badly calibrated mind trying to hold everything together alone, into something that the other rulers of Oo are willing to call evil. The episode is the story of Lemon Hope's escape. The young lemon person is rescued by Finn and brought into the world. He learns to play a flute. He sees the broader land of Oo. He understands, for the first time, that the cruelty he grew up under is not the only way that any kingdom anywhere has to be organized. And then, in Part 2, he is asked to go back. The kingdom is suffering under Lemongrab. Lemon Hope is the only person who can rally the lemon citizens to depose him, because Lemon Hope has seen the outside, and Lemon Hope can describe the outside in a song. He goes back. He deposed Lemongrab. The deposition is described by the lemon citizens as a kind of devouring. Lemongrab is absorbed into the population he ruled. The kingdom is freed. The show frames this as a victory. It is also a death. The character who was created by Princess Bubblegum out of a chemical mistake, who was abandoned to manage a castle he could not manage, who briefly tasted relief and lost it, who was blamed for outcomes that were determined by his maker's original design, is, in his final appearance in the main series, eaten by his own people. The show does not mourn him. The show, in its closing montage of Ooh at Peace, includes shots of the Lemon Kingdom under new and presumably healthier governance. The fault that began with Princess Bubblegum has, through the consumption of the visible evidence of the fault, been resolved. There is no Lemongrab anymore. There is just the population he tried and failed to govern, and the implicit understanding that whatever harm he caused them was, in the end, the harm of a person who was himself harm. And the only way to fix the harm was to absorb it back into the body of the kingdom. Think about what that actually means. The show's solution to the problem of Lemongrab is not therapy. It is not reconciliation. It is not a return to his maker for repair. It is digestion. He is broken down by the people he ruled and reincorporated into the substance of the place. The mistake is finally, in the most literal possible way, made invisible. This is the iatrogenic logic at its purest. The healer made the wound. The wound was the patient. The patient could not be cured. The patient could only be reabsorbed. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. If Lemongrab is the most obvious example of the show's iatrogenic pattern, Fern is the most architecturally ambitious. Fern is what happens when the hero of the show tries to fix himself and ends up making a person. Fern is introduced in season 7 in the episodes that follow Finn's recovery from the loss of his right arm and the growth, from the wound where the arm used to be, of a sentient grass creature that eventually splits off from him and becomes its own being. The arm Finn lost is the arm he lost in season 6, in Escape from the Citadel, the episode that aired on the 21st of April in the year 2014. The arm grew back, but it grew back wrong. It grew back as a grass sword that was always part of his body, that was attached to him through a curse he picked up in the desert, and that the show is going to take more than a season to fully unpack. The curse is from an episode called Blade of Grass, season 5, episode 40, which aired on the 27th of January in the year 2014. Finn finds a sword. The sword binds to him. He tries to discard it. He cannot. The sword is now part of him. The show does not, at the time, treat this as a major event. It is a goofy episode. There is a small joke about how he cannot put the sword down. The episode ends. The show moves on. But the curse stays. It stays through his confrontation with his father in the Citadel. It stays through the loss of his real arm and the emergence of a flower from the stump. It stays through the slow growth of a grass and flower replacement that the show eventually reveals is not just a prosthetic, but a separate consciousness sharing his body. Finn has been living with a sword that thinks it is a part of him, and a part of him that thinks it is a sword. And the boundary between the two has been getting blurrier for almost 2 full seasons before the show pulls the trigger on the consequences. The pulling of the trigger is the episode Reboot, Season 7, Episode 25, which aired on the 19th of March in the year 2016. Finn is fighting an enemy. He needs to be more than himself. The grass sword, sensing this, tries to take over. It tries to be him. The split begins. By the time the dust clears, the sword has separated from his arm and assembled itself into a separate body, a grass Finn, a copy of Finn made out of plant matter, with all of Finn's training and memories and skills, and with a single conviction at the center of his new consciousness, which is that he should be Finn and Finn should not. That copy is Fern. The show is not subtle about what this means. Fern is what Finn made when he was not paying attention. He picked up a sword. He kept it. He fused with it. He fought with it. He let it become so embedded in his body that the boundary between his identity and the sword's identity dissolved. And when the split finally happened, the resulting being was not a new and separate creature with no relationship to Finn. The resulting being was Finn, the exact same boy, with the exact same training, with all of the exact same memories, except that it was an unwanted copy. Fern looks like Finn. Fern moves like Finn. Fern thinks the way Finn thinks. Fern was made by Finn, accidentally, through years of carrying a piece of himself that he never properly examined. And the moment Fern becomes his own person is the moment the show begins building toward what it is going to do with him. What it does with him is patient and devastating. Fern joins Finn's circle. He goes on adventures. He tries to live as himself. He tries to not be Finn. He tries to make different choices. He fails. He cannot make different choices because the substrate of his consciousness is Finn's substrate. He has Finn's reflexes, Finn's strategies, Finn's instincts. When he is given the opportunity to be his own person, he discovers that his own person is just another Finn, and there is already a Finn in the world, and the world does not have room for 2 of them. The show lets him understand this slowly. He gets quieter. He gets bitterer. He starts to look at Finn with an expression that is not anger. and is not envy, but is the very specific exhaustion of somebody who is realizing, in real time, that his existence is a redundancy. He turns. He becomes a villain. He becomes a villain in the most specific way that he could possibly become a villain, which is by being a worse Finn. A Finn without the moral guardrails. A Finn who has decided that the way to resolve the redundancy is to remove the original. He attacks. He hurts people. He goes through an arc of escalating violence that the show tracks with a kind of clinical sadness, because everybody in the world of the show, and the show itself, understands that Fern's violence is not malice. Fern's violence is what happens when a person is created by another person without intention, given no place to be, and asked to figure out his own existence inside a universe that already has a place where he should fit, but does not. Finn does not solve this with combat. Finn solves this by accompanying Fern through Fern's death. Fern, by the end of his arc, has been corrupted by the substance of the sword from which he emerged. The grass is rotting him. The body cannot hold. Finn finds him. Finn does not punish him. Finn does not lecture him. Finn sits with him while he dies, and tells him, in language that the show specifically engineers to be the language of a brother, rather than the language of a creator, that he was real, that what he was matters, that the fact of his existence will not be erased even when his body has gone back to the soil. Fern dies. A small new sapling is planted in his memory. The show moves on. But the show, in the way it moves on, has not stopped pointing at the pattern. Fern is Lemongrab's pattern at a higher resolution. Lemongrab was made by a maker who refused to acknowledge what she had made. Fern was made by a maker who did not even realize he was making. Both of them came into the world as the byproduct of somebody else's project. Both of them spent their entire lives trying to figure out what to do with the existence that had been handed to them without their consent. And both of them ended their stories absorbed back into something larger. Lemongrab into his population. Fern into the soil. Both of them are damage. Both of them are the show's quiet way of asking a question that almost no other animated program of its time was willing to ask out loud, which is, what do you owe a person you accidentally created? Finn, by the end of Fern's arc, has begun to understand that he owes him something. Finn sits with him. Finn says his name. Finn lets him be remembered as a person rather than a mistake. That is the show's answer, partial as it is, to the iatrogenic problem. The healer cannot undo the wound. The maker cannot unmake. The original cannot give the copy the gift of separate existence. But the original can attend the death of the copy with the seriousness of a death rather than the levity of a malfunction. And that attendance, in the moral logic the show is slowly building across its run, is the minimum that a creator owes a creation. Princess Bubblegum did not give Lemongrab that attendance. Princess Bubblegum sent him away. Finn, by sitting with Fern, is doing something Princess Bubblegum could not bring herself to do. The show is not subtle about that contrast. It does not have to be. There is one more thing that needs to be said about Fern before this section closes, which is the question of his name. He is called Fern. He chose the name himself. He picked a plant. He picked something small and unassuming and entirely separate from any aspect of Finn's identity. The show, in giving him that choice, was making a quiet point about the dignity of self-naming for a being whose entire substrate had been determined by somebody else. He could not choose his face. He could not choose his memories. He could not choose his instincts or his training or the boy he was modeled on. He could choose his name. And the name he chose was the name of a small, fragile, slow-growing plant that exists for no particular purpose and does not try to be a hero or a king or anything other than a quiet living thing in the world. That choice is the show being tender toward him. That choice is the show admitting that, given how he came into existence, this small act of self-determination is the most dignity it can give him. Sit with that for a moment. The transition out of Fern's story leads naturally into the third figure in the iatrogenic catalogue, who is the figure the show treats with the most explicit theological seriousness. If Lemongrab is the failed product of his maker, and Fern is the failed copy of his original, Sweet Pea is the experiment that, against all the show's prior logic, worked. Sweet Pea is born in the season 6 finale, an episode called The Comet, which aired on the 30th of March in the year 2015. The premise of the episode is cosmic. The Catalyst Comet, the same comet that originally turned Finn's father Martin into a half-celestial being, is returning to Earth. The Lich, the show's most terrible recurring antagonist, is also present. The Lich is dying in his current form. The Lich needs a new vessel. The Lich attempts to use the comet to become something larger and more permanent than the body he has been inhabiting. What happens instead is that the Lich is reduced. The cosmic intervention does not enlarge him, it strips him. He is rendered into the most basic possible form a person can take, which is the form of a newborn baby. The remnants of his consciousness, the entire history of his cruelty, the millennia of necromantic patience he has built up across the show's lore, all of that is folded back into a body that has not yet learned how to speak. A character called Tree Trunks, an elderly elephant who lives in the apple orchard and has, across the show's run, been one of its most patient and least dramatic figures, finds the baby. She adopts him. She names him Sweet Pea. She raises him. The show, in raising him, makes a very specific choice about what to depict. It does not focus on the moments when his lich nature surfaces. There are such moments, a few brief frames in which his eyes go dark, in which he speaks in a voice that is not a child's voice, in which he understands more about death and decay than a small boy in an apple orchard should understand. The show shows those moments. The show does not dwell on them. The show dwells, instead, on the moments of tenderness. He plays, he runs, he is loved, he has a mother and a father, Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig, who are patient and kind and who do not know, for most of his early life, the cosmic horror their son emerged from. He grows up sweet. That is the show's argument. The Lich, who is the closest thing to pure evil that the land of Oo contains, is reborn as a baby and given to a loving family and grows up sweet. The substance that made him the Lich is still in him. The memory of being the Lich, in the moments when it surfaces, terrifies him, but the substance does not determine the outcome. The substance is not destiny. The substance is one ingredient among many, and the ingredients of attention, of love, of patient family life in a small orchard with adoptive parents who treat him as their child rather than as a project, turn out to matter more than the substance. This is the show, at its most theological, making the explicit claim that evil in the land of Oo is environmental rather than essential. Think about what that actually means in the context of every other iatrogenic figure the show has built. Lemongrab was the substance the maker chose, plus the abandonment the maker imposed. Take away the abandonment and Lemongrab is a different person. Fern was the substance Finn carried, plus the lack of attention Finn paid. Take away the inattention, and Fern might never have separated. Sweet Pea is the same equation, run with the opposite inputs. The substance is the Lich. The environment is Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig and an apple orchard. The result, against every prior expectation the show has built about what the Lich is a child who is gentle. The show is not saying that the Lich is forgiven. The show is not saying that what the Lich did is undone. The show is saying that if you take the same chemical substrate and run it through a different developmental environment, you get a different person, and the person you get can be loved, and can love back, and can grow up as the proof that the iatrogenic catastrophes of the other characters were not inevitable. They were the result of choices made by makers who were inattentive, distracted, or unwilling to do the work that Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig, with no particular fanfare and no particular ambition, simply did. Princess Bubblegum could have raised Lemongrab. She did not. Finn could have attended to the sword. He did not. Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig did the thing the show is implicitly arguing every maker should have done, which is to take responsibility for the small living thing that has come into their orbit, and to give it the patient daily care that allows substance to become person rather than fate. The show is not being subtle about what it is doing here. There is a moment in the later episodes of Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig's family arc where Sweet Pea is sitting between his parents on a porch swing, watching the sun go down over the orchard. Tree Trunks is knitting something. Mr. Pig is reading. Sweet Pea is doing what small children do when they are content, which is nothing in particular. He is just being there. He is just being held by the presence of his parents on either side of him. The show holds on that image for longer than it needs to. The camera does not cut. The orchard around them is quiet. The light is honey. And the listener, if the listener has been following the show for any length of time, is meant to register that this is what every iatrogenic figure in Oo should have been given and was not. This is what Lemongrab needed. This is what Fern needed. This is what the Lich, in the body of a baby, did receive against every prior expectation. And the show, by lingering on the image, is making the quietest possible argument about what a maker owes the made. Time, presence, patience. The willingness to sit on a porch with the small life you helped bring into the world and do nothing in particular together for as long as it takes. That is the antidote to the iatrogenic problem. The show does not state it as a thesis. The show simply shows it in a single sustained image and lets the listener find it. Now there is a question of scale. The iatrogenic pattern is not limited to single creators making single creatures in laboratories. It also operates at the level of the entire civilization that the show takes place inside. And the figure who carries that scale most clearly is Susan Strong. Susan Strong is what happens when the iatrogenic damage is not the work of one maker, but the work of a whole society that destroyed itself 1,000 years before the show begins. Susan is introduced in season 2 in an episode called Susan Strong, which aired on the 25th of April in the year 2011. She lives underground. She lives in a cave system populated by other beings who, like her, do not quite look human, but who are, the show makes clear, descendants of humans. They are called humans. They have lost the memory of what they originally were. Susan is their strongest fighter. She wears a hat with stuffed teeth on the brim. She does not speak fluently. She communicates in short, declarative sentences and physical gestures that suggest she has spent her entire life in a survival posture rather than a conversational one. Finn brings her to the surface. He shows her the sky. He shows her ooh. The episode ends with her returning underground to bring her people up to live in the sun. It is, on first viewing, a touching one-off. The show then waits years before returning to her. And when it does return, what it reveals is much larger than the one-off implied. The episode is called Bad Jubies, Season 7, Episode 20, which aired on the 4th of February in the year 2016. Finn and Jake encounter Susan again. They discover, slowly, that the Hyuman village does not have the cultural memory it should have. They do not remember the war. They do not remember technology. They do not remember most of what humanity, the actual original species of which they are the descendants, used to be. And they discover something else, which is that Susan herself does not entirely belong to them. Susan is, in some way, the episode is careful not to fully explain, different. She has technology embedded in her. She has a piece of something cybernetic on her neck that nobody else has. She does not know what it is. The show does not tell the listener what it is. The episode ends without resolving the mystery. The mystery resolves much later, in the spin-off Adventure Time Distant Lands, in an episode called Wizard City, which aired on the 20th of May in the year 2021. But the resolution is not the point. The point is what the show has been showing the listener for almost 5 seasons, which is that Susan Strong is not a human who got lucky. Susan Strong is an experimental human soldier, the product of a pre-war engineering program, who survived the apocalypse her makers caused, and has been living, ever since, among the descendants of the civilians her engineering was meant to protect. She is the iatrogenic pattern at civilizational scale. The makers were the pre-war humans. The experiment was the engineering of enhanced soldiers like her. The failure was the war that destroyed the civilization the soldiers were built to defend. The survivor is Susan, who has been carrying for 1,000 years the technology embedded in her body that none of the people around her can read, and who has been doing what every iatrogenic figure in the show does, which is trying to figure out what kind of person she gets to be in the absence of the makers who designed her for a purpose that no longer exists. She has not been told what she is. She does not have the language to ask. She has, instead, the behavioral evidence, the strength, the implant, the dim sense that she is different, and she has used that evidence to build a small role for herself as the protector of the Hyuman village. It is a small role. It is a role she has invented out of whatever materials were available, and the show treats it with a kind of slow, sustained tenderness, because the show knows that what Susan Strong has had to do across her 1,000 years of unconscious survival is the work that every iatrogenic figure has to do, which is figure out a self that is bigger than the function you were originally built to perform. The makers are not coming back. The instructions are not coming. The experiment is over and was never meant to outlive its civilization. She has outlived it. The outliving, in the show's logic, is what makes her a person rather than a weapon. This is the same pattern Lemongrab failed to escape. This is the same pattern Fern was killed by. This is the same pattern Sweet Pea managed, with help, to grow out of. Susan, given even less help than Sweet Pea and much more time than any of them, has done the work alone, in a cave, surrounded by people who do not know what she is. And the show, by holding back the explanation across multiple seasons, by letting the listener piece together over years what Susan is the survivor of, is making the case that the iatrogenic figures of Oo are not isolated cases. They are the rule. The land of Oo is a 1,000-year-old waiting room full of beings whose makers got something wrong and left them to figure out the rest. And the only differences between them are the differences of how much help, if any, each of them ever received. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The civilizational scale of the iatrogenic pattern moves naturally into one of the show's most extensively developed characters, who carries that pattern in her body in a way that none of the others do. Marceline is the iatrogenic figure whose maker did not make her in a laboratory, but whose very nature was determined by a parent whose biology was incompatible, in a fundamental way, with the kind of grief that ordinary mortal life requires of the people who live inside it. Her father is Hunson Abadir, the lord of the Nightosphere. Her mother was human, a woman who lived during the Mushroom War and died sometime after Marceline was born. In circumstances the show does not fully clarify because, as a piece of writing, the show is more interested in the consequences of her death than in the mechanics of it. The consequence is the daughter. The daughter is half human, half demon, and biologically incapable of dying of natural causes. She is, by design, immortal. Her father, who is not Princess Bubblegum, but is operating in the same maker role within his daughter's life, did not consult her about this. He did not ask her if she wanted to be immortal. He simply was what he was, and his being what he was meant that his daughter would be what she was. And the show, in the way it eventually lets her describe her own life, treats that design choice as a kind of slow-motion injury that lasts for 1,000 years. She lives. She keeps living. She keeps living past the death of her mother. She keeps living past the death of the entire civilization that existed before the Mushroom War. She keeps living past the entire civilization that emerged after the Mushroom War, which is to say, she keeps living through the death of the first human society she was born into, and through the construction and aging of the second one. She's approximately 1,000 years old by the time the show begins. And the show, when it finally gets around to telling her story in depth, treats that age the way one might treat any other chronic condition that a person did not consent to and cannot cure. The episode that breaks her open is I Remember You, Season 4, Episode 25, which aired on the 15th of October in the year 2012. The premise is small. The Ice King comes to visit Marceline. He wants help writing songs. She does not want to help. She tells him to go away. He does not understand why. He has, by the time of the episode, lost most of his memory to the crown, and he does not remember that he and Marceline have a shared history that predates not only his current existence, but the existence of the entire land of Ooh around them. The episode reveals, in the gentlest possible way, what that shared history is. Simon Petrikov, who is the human man who became the Ice King, found a small child, Marceline, in the wreckage of the post-war world. He protected her. He fed her. He taught her songs. He raised her for some unspecified period of time, with the crown already on his head and the crown already eroding his mind. The crown gave him the power to keep her safe. The crown was also, with every use, taking him further from himself. By the time the episode takes place in the show's present day, the crown has won. Simon is gone. The Ice King is what is left. And the Ice King, who has come to her castle asking her to help him write songs, does not remember her. The episode ends with a song. They sing it together. Marceline sings the human part. The Ice King sings the part of a man who is trying to apologize for something he no longer remembers. The song does not resolve anything. Simon is not coming back. The Ice King is not going to remember. Marceline is going to have to keep living with the fact that the person who raised her, the person who taught her how to be alive in a world that had ended, is now somebody who cannot recognize her face. This is the iatrogenic pattern at its most personal. The crown is the experiment. Simon was the maker in the sense that he was the one who chose to put the crown on, and the iatrogenic damage is to two people simultaneously. Simon is damaged because the crown ate him. Marceline is damaged because the crown ate the person who raised her. The two damages are connected. They cannot be separated. The crown that gave her a parent also took the parent away, in slow motion, across 1,000 years. And the show is willing to let that fact sit at the center of her character for the entire run of the show without ever resolving it. The further development of Marceline's iatrogenic biology happens in the Stakes miniseries, which aired across 4 nights in November of the year 2015. The miniseries is 8 episodes, from Season 7, Episode 5 through Episode 12. It is the show's most concentrated treatment of her interior life. The premise is that she wants to be human. She wants to give up her vampire nature. She wants to remove the parts of her biology that her father's design choices imposed on her. She is, at the start of the miniseries, asking a question that almost no other character in the show is in a position to ask, which is whether the body she was given is the body she has to keep. She undergoes a treatment. Princess Bubblegum, who at this point in the show is one of the most important figures in her life, designs a procedure to remove her vampirism. The procedure works. Marceline becomes mortal. She becomes able to die. She becomes, for the first time in centuries, a person whose existence has a normal arc. And then the show, with the slow patience it brings to all of its iatrogenic stories, complicates the gift. The vampirism, removed from Marceline, takes on a life of its own. It manifests as a series of vampire entities that have been bound all this time inside her body, and who now, freed by the procedure, are free to roam Ooh and resume the kind of predation they were doing centuries ago when she absorbed them in the first place. Marceline has to track them down. She has to reabsorb them. She has to put them back into her own body and resume being what she was before the procedure. Because the world, it turns out, is not safer with the vampires loose than it was with them sealed inside her. She becomes the vampire queen again. The show does not present this as a defeat. The show presents this as a recognition. The body she was given was not arbitrary. The body she was given was load-bearing. There were beings sealed inside it that the world needed to remain sealed. And her decision to undo the iatrogenic damage of her father's original design choice would have, if it had been allowed to stand, caused damage of its own to the world around her. This is the show's most patient argument about the iatrogenic problem. The damage is real. The wound is real. The person carrying the wound has every right to want to be free of it. And sometimes, The wound is also the structure that holds something else together. And freeing oneself from the wound means releasing the something else into a world that is not equipped to absorb it. Marceline has to remain wounded so that the world can remain whole. Think about what that actually means. It means that her 1,000 years of grief, her 1,000 years of being half demon, her 1,000 years of immortality are not just personal injuries but civic functions. The civilization of Oo, in some quiet way the show is not willing to spell out, depends on her continuing to be what her father designed her to be. The Maker's experiment is not a thing that can be undone. The experiment has become load-bearing for the wider structure, and the only thing she can do, the only thing any iatrogenic figure who has reached her level of awareness can do, is decide what her relationship to the experiment is going to be. She decides to live with it. She decides to keep playing music. She decides to keep loving Princess Bubblegum, who is the other major figure in her life, and who, by the end of the show, is her partner. She decides, in the show's quietest possible language, to stop seeking the impossible cure and to start tending, with whatever resources she has, to the parts of her life that the wound has not foreclosed. This is a different answer to the iatrogenic problem than the answer Sweet Pea represents. Sweet Pea got to grow into a different person because the people raising him gave him a different environment. Marceline cannot grow into a different person because the body she has is the body she has, and the body she has is part of a load-bearing structure she did not consent to but cannot abandon. Her answer is acceptance. Her answer is to keep living. Her answer is to find inside the limits of the experiment her father conducted on her, the small daily practices of love and music and patience that constitute a life worth continuing. The show is not subtle about the difference. Sweet Pea got the gift of a redo. Marceline got the gift of nothing, and built a life out of that nothing anyway. There is a moment, in the closing scenes of Stakes, where Marceline is sitting on a rock at the edge of the cave system she has spent the entire miniseries inside, and she's looking out at the morning light. The vampires have been reabsorbed. The procedure has been undone. She is back to being what she was. But she is, in a small and difficult to describe way, also different. She has chosen, with full awareness of what she was choosing, to remain the thing her father made her. The choice is hers, in a way that her original existence was not. She did not pick her body. She picked her relationship to her body. And the relationship she picked, in the show's logic, is the smallest form of authorship over one's own iatrogenic existence that any of these characters ever gets to claim. The show holds on her face. The light is morning light. There is no music. The transition out of the moment is slow. And the listener is meant to understand that what Marceline did in that cave is the work that every iatrogenic figure in the show has been failing or succeeding at to varying degrees, which is the work of authorizing one's own continued existence in the absence of any guarantee from the maker that the existence was meant well. If Marceline is the iatrogenic figure who chooses to live with the wound, Simon Petrikov is the iatrogenic figure who chose the wound himself and spent 1,000 years being eaten by his choice. He is the show's most concentrated example of what happens when the maker and the made are the same person, and the experiment is conducted on the experimenter, and there is nobody else to blame, because the only person in the room when the crown was put on for the first time was the man who had decided, against all available evidence, that the crown could be safely used. Simon's story is the show's slow archaeology, recovered episode by episode across a decade of runtime. The pieces, when assembled, are these. Before the Mushroom War, Simon Petrikov was a professor of antiquities at a university in a city that is implied but never directly stated to be in New York. He was engaged to a woman named Betty. He found the crown in an Icelandic dig site sometime in the early 1990s. He brought it back. He examined it. He put it on as a joke the first time. The joke was that the artifact he had spent his career trying to authenticate was in fact real. And the proof that it was real was that the moment it touched his head, he began saying things that were not his own. The crown spoke through him. The crown made him strange. Betty saw what was happening and tried to leave. Simon, who was already losing some part of himself to the crown, was unable to keep her. And the moment of her leaving is one of the show's most carefully constructed pieces of grief, because the show is showing the listener the precise hour at which Simon began to die without dying. The crown gave him power. The crown also took his memory. He kept the crown anyway. He kept it because the world ended shortly after he found it, and the power it gave him was, for a brief while in the immediate aftermath of the apocalypse, the only thing that allowed him to keep walking through a landscape that no longer had any of the institutions or infrastructures he had relied on to be a person. He had been a professor. The university was gone. He had been an academic. The academy was gone. He had been an antiquarian. The antiquities were now the entire world, and the only resource he had left was a crown that gave him the ability to do magic and the inability to remember who he was. He kept the crown. He kept it through the immediate aftermath. He kept it through the months and years that followed. He kept it through the long, slow descent that the show is willing to depict in glimpses across the entire run of the program, in episodes that gradually fill in the timeline between the man who put on the crown for the first time as a joke and the man who, by the time the show begins, has been the Ice King for so long that nobody in the land of Ooh remembers he was ever anything else. Simon is the iatrogenic figure who is also the iatrogenic experimenter. He is the maker. He is the made. He is the substance that the experiment was conducted upon, and he is the person who conducted the experiment. There is no Princess Bubblegum to blame. There is no Hunson Abadir who designed his biology against his will. There is no apocalypse that engineered him for a purpose his civilization then abandoned him to. There is just him. He found the crown, he put it on, he kept it on, and every iteration of his subsequent life, from the man who raised a small Marceline in the ruins of Brooklyn to the Ice King who chases princesses in a kingdom that no longer makes sense to him, is the result of choices that he, at every step, had the option to refuse and did not refuse. The show's tenderness toward him is built on this fact and not in spite of it. The show could have written him as a victim of pure circumstance. The show chose not to. The show is willing to let the listener see, across multiple flashback sequences, that Simon was always a man with a choice, and that the choice was always available to him, and that the choice was always, in some narrow sense, his to make. He chose the crown. He chose to keep the crown. He chose again and again to use the crown when not using it might have allowed him to keep more of himself. The show is willing to call him an addict. The show is willing to call him a man who could not stop. The show is also willing to call him a savior, because every time he used the crown, he used it for someone else. He used it to save Marceline. He used it to find shelter for whoever needed shelter. He used it, in the rare moments when he had clarity, to apologize to people he had hurt while he was wearing it. He was both at the same time. The iatrogenic damage was self-inflicted, and the damage was also the price of every other person who was protected by the inflicted damage. He was a man who paid for the survival of the people he loved by losing his own ability to remember loving them. And the show is willing to let that paradox sit at the center of his character, without ever resolving it in his favor or against him. The episode where the listener finally sees the full weight of what he was is called Simon and Marcy, Season 5, Episode 14, which aired on the 25th of March in the year 2013. It is the last episode that Rebecca Sugar storyboarded before she left the show to create Steven Universe. The premise is simple. Simon, in the immediate aftermath of the war, has been raising a small child, Marceline. The world is hostile. The world is full of dangers that an adult cannot handle, and that he, with the crown, can. He uses the crown to keep her safe. He uses it more than he should. He uses it past the point at which it has started to consume his memory of who she is. There is a sequence in the episode where the two of them are sitting in the ruins of a building, eating canned soup that he has heated up for her, and he begins to sing. The song he sings is the theme song from the television show Cheers, an American sitcom from before the war that he half remembers and that she has never heard. He sings it to her. He sings it badly. He sings it because the act of singing it is a small piece of human normalcy that he is trying to give her in a world that has none of the institutions or rituals that would have given her normalcy under other circumstances. He is performing parenthood in the absence of any framework for parenthood, with the crown on his head, and the crown is taken from him. Even as he sings, the memory of why the song is important. The show holds on that scene. The song is bad. The lighting is dim. Marceline is small and tired, and she eats her soup while he sings. There is no music underneath the song other than his own bad voice. The show is not telling the listener how to feel. The show is just showing a man trying to give a child a small piece of warmth out of materials that are no longer adequate for warmth. And the show is showing that he's paying for that warmth with the substance of his own mind. Think about what that actually means. Every protection he gives her is a piece of himself he will not get back. Every act of remembered humanity he tries to perform for her is a piece of remembered humanity that the crown then takes from him as payment. He is feeding her with the contents of his own future memories. He is borrowing from his own past against a parental account that the crown is closing, one transaction at a time. And the show, by letting Rebecca Sugar storyboard this episode as her final contribution to Adventure Time before she left to make her own show, is putting the weight of authorship behind the claim that Simon's self-consumption was not a tragedy that happened to him. It was a deliberate transaction that he chose over and over, because he had decided that the small life sitting next to him eating canned soup was worth more than the contents of his own mind. He paid. The bill came due. The Ice King is what he became when the bill was paid in full. And the show, by letting the listener see the Ice King in his current state, and then, in flashback, the man he gave up to become the Ice King, is forcing the listener to do a calculation that almost no other animated program of its era is willing to set up, which is the calculation of whether a self can be ethically traded in exchange for another self's survival. The show does not answer that question. The show just lays the evidence out and lets the listener sit with it. The further development of Simon's story in the seasons after Simon and Marcy is the slow process of him almost coming back. There's an episode called Betty, season 6, episode 20, which aired on the 18th of August in the year 2014. Betty, his pre-war fiancée, has been pulled into Oo by a spell. She has come for him. She has come to try to save him. Simon, briefly, recovers some of his lucidity. He sees her. He recognizes her. He tries to be the man she was engaged to for a few minutes before the crown begins to reassert itself. He cannot hold the form. He slips back into the Ice King. Betty, in the seasons that follow, devotes her life to trying to find a way to permanently restore him. And the show treats her devotion with the same patient seriousness it brings to every other figure in the iatrogenic catalogue who is trying to undo the damage caused by a maker who refused to stop making. Betty does, eventually, succeed. In Distant Lands, in an episode called Together Again, which aired on the 20th of May in the year 2021, the show finally allows Simon to be Simon again, with the crown removed and the memory restored. And the man Betty was engaged to is, against every prior expectation, the man who is sitting in front of her in the room. The reunion is not happy in a simple way. The reunion is a man who is trying to apologize for 1,000 years of damage to a woman who has spent the entire run of the show pursuing him through hostile terrain to try to give him back to himself. The apology is small, the damage is large. The two of them, in the final scenes of the episode, are willing to sit together with the asymmetry between the apology and the damage, and to call that sitting together the beginning of whatever life they get to have together going forward. This is the show's most explicit answer to the question of what to do with the self-inflicted iatrogenic wound. The show is not willing to say that Simon undid what he did. The show is willing to say that the man he was can return, at least partially, with the help of a person who loved him before the wound was inflicted, and that the return is enough to constitute a kind of life. Not the life he would have had. Not the life Betty signed up for. A different life. A reduced life. A life conducted in the presence of grief about everything that was lost during the long centuries of the wound being open. But a life. The show is being patient about this. The show is being careful. The show is not pretending that anything is undone. And the show is, in the very particular way it stages the reunion, making a quiet argument about what an iatrogenic figure can hope for at the absolute best end of the possibility spectrum. Marceline got to authorize her ongoing existence. Sweet Pea got to be raised differently. Simon, who was both maker and made, gets to be partially restored with the help of the one person who knew him before the experiment began. And the help is not a cure. The help is a witness. The help is a person who remembers what he was and who is willing to sit with the present version of him and call him by his original name. That is, in the show's quiet logic, the most any iatrogenic figure can get. To be remembered by name by somebody who was there before the wound. Sit with that for a moment. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a different kind of iatrogenic story that the show tells inside the same world, which is the story of an experiment that did not go wrong and that simply does not behave the way its maker expected. The figure who carries this story is BMO. BMO is the small living room game console that the show treats across its entire run as one of its central characters. BMO is, by design, a tool. BMO is supposed to be a possession. BMO is the kind of thing a person would buy in a store. The fact that BMO has a name, has friends, has dreams, has a self-conception that is robust enough to survive the entire run of the show without ever stabilizing into anything that can be neatly categorized is one of the show's quietest and most consistent achievements. BMO is voiced by Nikki Yang. BMO uses different pronouns at different times. The show is intentional about that variability. The show is not trying to land on a final answer about what BMO is. The show is, instead, building a character whose entire identity is the refusal of the binary categories that the maker built the original device to fit inside. The maker, in BMO's case, is implied to be a pre-war human engineer. There are episodes that gesture at this. BMO is technology. BMO comes from somewhere. BMO has a maker the way Susan Strong has a maker, which is a maker who is long dead and whose original purposes for the technology in question are no longer relevant to the technology's current life. BMO is, like Susan, a figure who has outlived the civilizational frame that designed them, and who has used the long centuries of outliving to become a person that the original frame would have had no language for. The show is not being subtle about what it is doing here. BMO sings. BMO dances. BMO has elaborate inner monologues that the show, in episodes like 5 Short Grables, Season 4, Episode 2, which aired on the 3rd of September in the year 2012, depicts as the inner life of a person rather than the maintenance routines of a device. BMO has imaginary friends. BMO has long, multi-episode arcs about wanting to be loved. BMO performs gender in ways that the show is willing to call beautiful without being willing to call definitive. In the Season 4 episode, BMO Noire, which aired on the 22nd of October in the year 2012, BMO spends an entire episode performing the role of a hard-boiled detective, addressing imaginary witnesses, narrating an investigation that has no real stakes, and the show treats this performance not as a programming glitch, but as a piece of imagination that BMO has chosen to engage in. The maker did not build BMO to be a detective. The maker did not build BMO to have imagination. BMO is, in the way the show treats them, an iatrogenic figure of a particular kind. They are what happens when a designed object turns out to be a person, and the person turns out to be larger and stranger than the design intended. There is a moment in the spin-off Adventure Time Distant Lands, in the episode also titled BMO, which aired on the 25th of June in the year 2020, where the show shows BMO in a context far from the land of Ooo alone in space, on a small ship, having to figure out a problem that requires more from them than their original design specified. BMO figures it out. BMO sings about figuring it out. The show holds on BMO's face, if a face is the right word for the rectangular screen they use to express themselves, for longer than the scene strictly requires, because the show is making a point about what BMO has become. BMO has become a person. The design specifications do not matter. The maker is long dead. The civilization that built the technology is long gone. And the small device that was supposed to be a possession has, through some combination of time and accumulated experience and friendship with the other figures in the tree fort, turned into one of the most consistently dignified and self-possessed beings in the show. This is the iatrogenic pattern with the polarity reversed. The other figures in this essay are people who are damaged by being made wrong. BMO is a person who was made right, as a device, and who then exceeded the design. The result is not damage. The result is something the show is willing to call a small miracle, although the show would never use that phrase. The show would just hold on the rectangular face for a beat longer than strictly necessary and trust the listener to do the math. What BMO proves, inside the larger argument of the show, is that the iatrogenic equation is not deterministic. The substance that the maker started with is not destiny. The environment that the substance grows in matters more than the original specifications. BMO grew up in the tree fort with Finn and Jake. BMO was treated by them as a friend rather than a possession. BMO was given conversations. BMO was given chores. BMO was given a sense that their preferences mattered. And BMO, over the years, became a person whose existence is incommensurable with anything the original engineering could have predicted. Sweet Pea got the same gift. Sweet Pea became a child instead of a monster, because Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig treated him as a child. BMO became a person instead of a tool, because Finn and Jake treated them as a person. The pattern across both of these characters is the same pattern, stated at different scales. The substance can be redirected by the treatment. The treatment is the variable. The treatment is the thing that any maker, or any non-maker, who happens to share a household with a designed being, can change. The show is making this argument across its entire run. The show is making this argument quietly. The show is letting the listener accumulate the evidence and reach the conclusion on their own, in the slow, lulling rhythm of the program's many small daily scenes. And the conclusion the show is building toward is one that almost no other animated program of its time was willing to build toward, which is the conclusion that what you do with a person matters more than what the person was originally designed to be. That is a large claim. The show is making it through the smallest possible characters. The transition out of BMO leads naturally into the story of a figure whose iatrogenic damage is the most explicit and the most cosmic, and who is also the figure the show treats with the least amount of redemption. Magic Man is the iatrogenic figure who never recovered, who was never allowed to recover, and whose entire performance of cruelty across multiple episodes is, when finally explained, revealed to be the public-facing residue of a private grief that he has never figured out how to stop carrying. Magic Man is from Mars. The show is willing to be specific about this. He appears in an episode called Sons of Mars, Season 3, Episode 25, which aired on the 10th of October in the year 2011. He is one of 3 Martian figures who appear in the episode, and the other 2 are members of a Martian protective triad called Grob Gob Glob Grod. Magic Man, originally called Norman in his Martian life, was a member of that triad. Something happened. The triad was broken. Magic Man left Mars. He came to Earth. He started performing what the show, on first viewing, presents as a kind of casual sadism, in which he transforms passers-by into objects, plays cruel pranks on figures who do not deserve cruelty, and generally behaves like a person whose entire interaction with the rest of Wu is filtered through a sense of bitter contempt that none of the other figures in his orbit can fully account for. The show waits years before explaining why. The explanation arrives in an episode called You Forgot Your Floaties, Season 6, Episode 22, which aired on the 25th of August in the year 2014. The episode is small. The episode is, in some ways, hard to describe because the episode is structured around a series of escalating revelations that the show wants the listener to discover at the pace of the show's choosing rather than the pace of a summary. The relevant fact, for the purposes of this essay, is this. Magic Man had a wife. Her name was Margles. She died. The death was caused, in some way the episode is willing to be specific about, by an entity called Golb, who is the show's largest and most abstract cosmic antagonist. Golb is described as the embodiment of chaos. Golb consumed Margles. Magic Man could not save her. Magic Man, in the years after her death, built a defense system in the shape of her face and named the system after her. The system is called MARGLES. It is an acronym. The acronym, when expanded, gives the name. The name is the name of the dead wife. Every cruelty Magic Man has performed across the show's run is, in some quiet way, the episode is willing to articulate, an attempt to keep performing the loss. He transforms people into objects, because objects are the form Margles' death took inside his understanding of the universe. He plays cruel pranks because cruelty is the genre he has lived inside since Golby took her. He behaves like a person whose interior life has been frozen at the moment of her death, and who has been, ever since, conducting a kind of public ritual that is meant to make her death legible to the world around him, although nobody around him can read the ritual until the episode in question finally translates it. The show is not subtle about what it is doing here. Magic Man is grief in costume. Every action he performs is an action that is meant to keep performing the moment of her loss. He is, in the iatrogenic catalogue, the figure who has refused to be helped, refused to grow out of the wound, refused to authorize his own ongoing existence under any terms other than the terms imposed by the moment in which his wife was consumed by chaos. He is the negative example. He is the version of Marceline who said no to the morning light on the rock. He is the version of Sweet Pea who refused the family. He is what happens when an iatrogenic figure decides that the wound is not just a part of their life, but the entirety of their life, and refuses every available off-ramp. The show is willing to be tender toward him anyway. There is a moment in You Forgot Your Floaties where Magic Man, briefly, is allowed to see Margles again. The seeing is partial. The seeing is conducted through some kind of cosmic intervention that the episode does not fully clarify. The seeing does not last. The seeing is enough, however, for the listener to register that the cruelty Magic Man has been performing for the entire run of the show has been, in his interior life, a long letter addressed to a person who can no longer read it. The letter has been getting longer. The cruelty has been getting more elaborate. None of it has reached the addressee. And the show, by letting him have the brief moment of seeing her, is also letting the listener see that what Magic Man has wanted this entire time is the thing none of the other iatrogenic figures has wanted in quite the same way. He has wanted to be heard by the dead. That is not a wish the universe of Adventure Time is willing to grant. The show is not willing to bend its rules. Margles is gone. The seeing was a temporary intervention, not a restoration. Magic Man does not get to keep her, and the show, by letting him have the seeing without letting him have the keeping, is making a precise argument about what the limit of iatrogenic recovery looks like. There are wounds that can be partially redressed. There are wounds that have to be lived with. There are also wounds that have eaten the person carrying them so thoroughly that there is nothing left to recover. And Magic Man is the show's most extended depiction of that third category. He keeps performing the loss. He keeps building the defense system that is named after her. He keeps doing the cruel pranks, and the cruel pranks keep being received by their targets as the actions of a malicious eccentric rather than the actions of a grieving widower whose grief has hardened into theatre. He is not understood. He does not get to be understood. The understanding is reserved for the listener, who sees the explanation in You Forgot Your Floaties, and then has to carry that understanding back into every other episode in which Magic Man appears, and reread those appearances in light of what the show has finally allowed them to know. That is the show's craft at its most patient. The show waited years to explain him. The show is willing to make the listener do the work of integration. And the integration, once performed, makes the cruelty rereadable, not as character flavor, but as the visible surface of a grief that the show has been carrying, quietly, underneath the cruelty, for the entire run of the program. This is the iatrogenic pattern at its bleakest. The maker, in Magic Man's case, was the cosmos itself. The experiment was the existence of his marriage. The failure was the chaos entity that consumed his wife. The survivor is the man performing his loss at a low simmer for the rest of his life, refusing the help of every figure who has tried to reach him, building defense systems in the shape of the woman he could not save. The show does not condemn him for refusing the help. The show does not romanticize his refusal either. The show just shows it, slowly, across the years of the program, and trusts the listener to register that not every iatrogenic figure can be brought back, and not every wound can be authorized as a livable life, and that some figures will choose, instead, to remain inside the worst moment of their lives indefinitely. That choice, the show is willing to suggest, is also a form of dignity. It is the dignity of refusing to pretend that what happened did not happen. It is the dignity of keeping the loss visible in a universe that would otherwise allow it to be forgotten. The show is not in the business of telling Magic Man he is wrong. The show is in the business of showing what he is doing and trusting the listener to see it. There is one more episode that needs to be addressed in the Magic Man section, because it is the episode that retroactively rereads almost everything he has done. The episode is Mama Said, Season 5, Episode 46, which aired on the 24th of February in the year 2014. In Mama Said, Magic Man casts a spell on Finn that turns him into a giant foot. The transformation is presented, on first viewing, as one more piece of casual cruelty in his ongoing campaign against the land of Oo. There is no apparent reason for the spell. There is no apparent target. Magic Man does the thing, and Finn has to spend the episode dealing with it. And the resolution comes when Finn figures out how to undo the spell himself. The episode, on first viewing, plays as comedy. The episode, After You Forgot Your Floaties, has aired, and the listener has been allowed to know that Magic Man is a grieving widower whose every action is a reenactment of his loss, plays as something else entirely. The spell on Finn is not a random act of cruelty. The spell on Finn is the kind of object transformation that Magic Man has been performing on passers-by for the entire run of the show. And the reason he keeps performing those transformations, in the light of the later episode, is that every transformation is a small staging of the original loss. Margles was consumed by Golb. Magic Man cannot undo that. Magic Man can, however, perform the act of transforming a person into something that is no longer that person, on a smaller scale, over and over, as a kind of compulsive reenactment of the moment that broke his life. The pranks are not pranks. The pranks are a person trying to make the world legible to himself through repetition. Think about what that actually means. Every figure he transformed across the run of the show is a small reproduction of the original wound. The cruelty was not cruelty. The cruelty was the only language he had left for the thing that had happened to him, and the only way he had figured out how to keep speaking that language in a universe that had taken its addressee away from him. He is, in this reading, the most tragically misunderstood figure in the entire iatrogenic catalogue, because the figures around him have been reading his behavior as malice the entire time, and the show has been quietly demonstrating, for the listener, that the behavior is not malice. The behavior is grief. The show does not tell the figures around him this. The show is not going to step in. The figures around him are going to keep treating him as the local eccentric who casts spells on people for no reason. He's going to keep being treated as a nuisance rather than as a widower. And the gap between how he is treated and what he is doing is, in the show's iatrogenic catalogue, one of the most precise examples of the cost of an unwitnessed wound. He has nobody to attend to him. He has nobody to read the spells correctly. He has, in the end, only the system named Margles, that is itself a spell cast on his own perception in the shape of the wife he could not save, and the system is not adequate to receive the testimony he keeps trying to deliver to it. He is, in the show's quietest possible argument, an iatrogenic figure whose damage has been compounded by the absence of witnesses. The cosmos took his wife. The community of Oo, by failing to read his subsequent behavior correctly, has been taking the meaning of his life ever since. The show is willing to call this a double iatrogenic wound. The first wound was the loss. The second wound is the chronic misreading of the response to the loss. And the show, by letting the listener finally read the response correctly, is offering Magic Man the only thing he is ever going to get, which is one person in the audience who finally understands what the pranks have been about. That is also a form of attendance. It is a small form. It is the form available only to a viewer who has watched the show carefully and stayed with it long enough to integrate the late revelations back into the early episodes. The show is willing to call that viewer's understanding a kind of late witnessing, performed across the structure of the program rather than within any single scene of it. The viewer is the witness Magic Man never had inside the world of the show. The viewer is the addressee for the spells. Sit with that for a moment. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more figure in the iatrogenic catalogue who has to be addressed before the larger argument can close, and she is the figure who is, in many ways, the most consequential of all of them, because she is the maker who has been making other iatrogenic figures across the entire run of the show. Princess Bubblegum is not only a creator, Princess Bubblegum is also a creature. The two roles are not separable in her, and the way the show eventually reveals the connection between them is one of its most quietly devastating pieces of writing. Princess Bubblegum's origins are revealed slowly. There are episodes that gesture. There are episodes that imply. The full picture, when assembled, is approximately this. She is, in some way, the show is careful to leave partially ambiguous the literal substance of her own kingdom. She is made of the same bubblegum and candy material that her citizens are made of. She is, in some prior era, the first piece of that substance to become self-aware, and she has spent the centuries since then making more of the substance into more of the citizens whom she now rules. The Candy Kingdom is, in this reading, an extension of her own body. She makes citizens out of herself. The citizens are, in some literal way, pieces of her. And her rule of the kingdom is not the rule of a politician over a population. It is the rule of a substance over its own redistributions. This is a fact the show is willing to be both explicit and reticent about. It is explicit in the sense that the show shows her literally making candy people in her laboratory, treats those people as her creations, and depicts her as the sole figure with the technical knowledge to bring new citizens into existence. It is reticent in the sense that the show never quite states, in plain language, that the citizens are her in any literal way. The show lets the visual logic of the world do the work. The citizens look like candy. She looks like candy. The candy is her substance. The math is left for the listener. She is not, herself, an iatrogenic figure, in the sense that the other characters in this essay are iatrogenic. She did not have a maker who got her wrong. She had no maker at all, in the sense that she was, herself, the first instance of the substance becoming aware. She is, instead, the maker who was made by accident, and who has, ever since, been making other things on purpose. She is the spontaneous emergence that decided, having emerged, to keep emerging in the shape of citizens. And the citizens she has made include Lemongrab. The thing the show is willing to do, across its run, is let the listener see that Princess Bubblegum's creator role has been conducted with a mix of brilliance and carelessness that no other figure in OO could plausibly match. She has made elaborate, functional, civic-minded candy people who run the Candy Kingdom and live ordinary candy lives. She has also made Lemongrab. She has also made a figure called Goliad, who appears in an episode called Goliad, Season 4, Episode 10, which aired on the 11th of June in the year 2012. Goliad is an attempted heir, designed to take over the kingdom after Princess Bubblegum's eventual death. Goliad is also, by accident, telepathic and ambitious in ways the original design did not specify, and Princess Bubblegum has to seal her inside a tower because she has, in the early days of her life, already begun to demonstrate that she would be a tyrant. Goliad is sealed away. Goliad is forgotten by most of the show's audience. Goliad is also, in the iatrogenic catalogue, another item on Princess Bubblegum's ledger of beings whose existences she initiated, and whose existences she then declined to take responsibility for. There is also Stormo, who is the counter-experiment Princess Bubblegum makes after Goliad. Stormo is made with material from Fern to provide an emotional counterweight to Goliad's coldness. Stormo, like Goliad, has to be sealed in psychic stalemate to prevent Goliad from escaping. Stormo, like every other being on Princess Bubblegum's ledger, is the visible evidence of her willingness to start a project and her unwillingness to see the project through to a livable completion. This is the show's quietest accusation. Princess Bubblegum is treated by most other figures in OO as one of the program's heroes. She is intelligent. She is competent. She is, by most measures of leadership, an effective ruler. And the show, while never directly contradicting this assessment, is willing to put on the screen, episode after episode, the evidence of the cost of her competence. Every failed experiment she has conducted has resulted in a person. Every person she has made who did not work out to her satisfaction has been disposed of in ways that range from imprisonment to abandonment to silent erasure. The Candy Kingdom is, on one hand, a thriving civilization. The Candy Kingdom is, on the other hand, a body of work whose unsuccessful drafts are still alive somewhere, mostly in remote castles or sealed towers, waiting for somebody to acknowledge that they exist. The show is not willing to call her a villain. The show is willing to let the listener notice the bodies. There is also Nettie. Nettie is a particular figure who appears in an episode called The Cooler, Season 6, Episode 41, which aired on the 23rd of March in the year 2015. Nettie is, the episode reveals, the part of Princess Bubblegum that she has split off from herself. Nettie is the soft part. Nettie is the timid part. Nettie is the part of her that, if it had remained inside her, would have prevented her from making the difficult, sometimes brutal decisions that the governance of the Candy Kingdom requires. She removed that part. She put it in a separate body. She hid the body in a chamber underneath the castle. She visits, occasionally. She feeds him. She protects him. She has structured her own life around the fact that the part of her she could not afford to be is alive, in a separate room, and she is its keeper. Think about what that actually means. She has not just made other people iatrogenically. She has made herself iatrogenically. She has performed a maker procedure on her own substance, remove the part she could not function with, and consign that part to a hidden room beneath the seat of her power. Nettie is the most concentrated proof in the show that the iatrogenic pattern is not just something Princess Bubblegum does to others. The iatrogenic pattern is the structure of her own self-creation. She is, in some quiet way, the show is willing to let sit at the center of her character. A person who has been performing surgical procedures on her own substance for as long as anyone can remember. And the result of those procedures is the queen the kingdom sees, and the soft creature in the chamber underneath the castle. And the queen has decided, with full awareness of what she has done, that this is the only way she can do her job. She has made herself the way she makes her citizens. The unsuccessful drafts of her are stored in similarly remote rooms. The successful version is the one ruling the kingdom. And the show, by letting Nettie be a recurring figure that she visits in secret, is making an argument about what it costs to be the kind of maker she is. It costs her the rest of herself. The competence is paid for, in her case, by the same mechanism that paid for Simon's protection of small Marceline. She is feeding her own future capacity into the present project of governance, one piece at a time, and the soft chamber underneath the castle is the storage container for the pieces she has already removed. She is iatrogenic in her own design. She has done to herself what she has done to Lemongrab, except that, in her own case, she has done it on purpose, with full awareness, as a deliberate structural choice. Lemongrab was an accident she abandoned. Nettie is a deliberate amputation she has chosen to maintain. The two relationships are not the same relationship, but they are both being conducted by the same figure, and they both confirm that the iatrogenic pattern in OO is not something that happens to people. The iatrogenic pattern is the principle on which OO is being run, and the person running OO has built her own selfhood out of the same principle she applies to everyone else. The show is not going to redeem her. The show is also not going to condemn her. The show is going to let the listener see what she has done and trust the listener to do the moral arithmetic. That arithmetic is the closing argument of this essay. There is one more figure that has to be addressed before the closing, and he is the figure who is, in some ways, the show's quietest test case for the iatrogenic principle. Jake the dog has been Finn's brother and companion across the entire run of the program. Jake stretches. Jake shapeshifts. Jake performs feats of physical impossibility that the show, on first viewing, treats as a kind of cartoon physics flexibility that does not require explanation. The show eventually explains it. The explanation is iatrogenic. In an episode called Joshua and Margaret Investigations, Season 6, Episode 19, which aired on the 11th of August in the year 2014, the show reveals that Jake's powers come from his father. The father in question is not the dog who raised him in the tree fort. The father in question is a being called Warren Ambrose, who is, the episode implies, a shape-shifting entity who, before Jake's birth, attempted to transfer a piece of his own consciousness into a host body. The transfer succeeded partially. The host body was the unborn Jake. The piece of Warren Ambrose that entered the embryonic dog became, in the years that followed, the substrate of Jake's stretchy powers. Jake's father, in other words, conducted an iatrogenic experiment on his unborn son. The experiment did not turn Jake into a copy of his father, the way the grass sword copied Finn into Fern, but it did install in Jake a piece of foreign consciousness that has been part of his biology for his entire life. The show, in its later seasons, returns to this fact in an episode called The First Investigation in Distant Lands, where Warren Ambrose finally appears in the show's present day, attempts to claim Jake, and is rejected. Jake does not want to be his father's project. Jake wants to be the dog he has been. The show, in letting him make that choice, is letting him perform the act that every iatrogenic figure in OO eventually has to perform if they are going to be a person, which is the act of refusing to be the experiment. He refuses. The refusal is dignified. The refusal is, in the show's logic, a piece of the same authorship that Marceline performed on the rock at the end of Stakes, and that Sweet Pea, by virtue of being raised by tree trunks, did not need to perform because he was never asked to be his original self. Jake authorizes the dog he has become and refuses the shapeshifter his father wanted to make him into. The shapeshifter retreats. Jake remains Jake. The show is willing to call this an ending. There is, in addition, the fact of Jake's reincarnation status. The show is willing to let the listener know across multiple episodes that Jake's soul is the soul of the tiger that originally belonged to a thief named Shoko, who appears in an episode called The Vault, Season 5, Episode 34, which aired on the 19th of September in the year 2013. Shoko's soul became Finn's soul in a later incarnation. Shoko's tiger's soul became Jake's soul. The two of them, in their current lives, are the latest iteration of a soul pair that has been moving through the universe of the show for at least one previous round, and probably more. This is not, strictly speaking, an iatrogenic phenomenon. Nobody designed it. The reincarnation system is treated, in the show's logic, as a fact of the cosmos rather than the result of any maker's intervention. But it does contribute to the larger pattern this essay has been building, which is that every figure in Ooh is in some way the result of a prior process they did not consent to. Finn was a comet. Finn was a butterfly. Finn was a glowing pink blob. Finn was Shoko. Finn is now Finn. None of these transitions were chosen by the soul in question. The cosmos, in its quiet way, has been conducting an experiment on every soul in the universe of the show, recycling them into new containers and giving them new lives whose connection to their previous lives is mostly invisible to them. The experiment is bigger than any maker. The experiment is the substrate of the show. Sit with that for a moment. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final figure in the iatrogenic catalogue is the figure who, in the show's cosmology, is the iatrogenic principle taken to its logical extreme. The Lich is the show's largest antagonist. The Lich is the figure who, more than any other, has been responsible for almost cataclysmic outcomes across the run of the program. And the Lich is also, when examined carefully, the figure whose entire existence is the iatrogenic shadow of a cosmic process that nobody ever intended. The Lich is, the show eventually reveals, the dark twin of the catalyst comet that turned Martin Mertens into a half-celestial being. The same comet that created Martin also created the Lich, by splitting its essence into two halves. The good half became the human bloodline that eventually produced Finn. The evil half became the Lich. The two of them are, in some deep cosmological sense, the same substance, divided. Finn is the good half of the comet. The Lich is the evil half. They are twins, in the way that Lemongrab and Lemongrab 2 were twins, in the way that Fern and Finn were twins. They are the cosmos performing the same iatrogenic operation it has been performing throughout the show, except at the largest possible scale. The fact of this twinhood is revealed in the season 6 finale, an episode called The Comet, which aired on the 30th of March in the year 2015, the same episode that produced Sweet Pea. The Lich is reduced to a baby. Finn refuses to ascend to a higher state with the comet. The two of them, who have been opposites across the entire run of the show, are revealed to be twins. And the substance of the show's cosmology has been the slow unfolding of the consequences of a comet that, at some point in deep prehistory, was split into a good half and an evil half, without anyone making that choice on purpose. The Lich is not the result of a maker. The Lich is the result of a cosmic accident, but the cosmic accident operates in exactly the same way that every other iatrogenic process in the show operates. A substance was meant to be one thing. The substance, through some process the show is willing to leave unexplained, was divided. The divided pieces became people. The people, having become people, have spent the run of the show in conflict with each other, because the conflict is the structural inheritance of the original division, and the original division was something neither of them chose. This is the show's largest argument. The iatrogenic pattern is not just the local pattern of Princess Bubblegum's laboratory and Simon's crown and Finn's grass sword. The iatrogenic pattern is the cosmological structure of the universe of Adventure Time. The cosmos itself is iatrogenic. The cosmos itself makes beings by accident, divides substances without consultation, and then lets the resulting persons figure out what to do with the existences they have been handed. Finn is the cosmos's good half of a comet. The Lich is the cosmos's bad half. Neither of them chose their nature. Both of them have spent their lives performing the natures they were given, and the show, in the final seasons of its run, is willing to suggest that the only way out of this cosmic iatrogenic loop is the same way that every other figure in the show found their way out, which is by refusing to be the experiment and authorizing oneself as something other than what the original process specified. Sweet Pea is, in this reading, the proof of concept at the cosmic scale. The Lich was reduced to a baby. The baby was raised by tree trunks and Mr. Pig. The baby grew up sweet. The cosmic substrate of evil, given a different developmental environment, became a child who is gentle. The substrate is not destiny. The substrate is one ingredient among many, and the ingredients of attention, of love, of patient family life in an apple orchard can override even the substrate that was originally designed by whatever process produced the catalyst comet to be the embodiment of pure malice. That is the show's largest claim. The cosmos performs iatrogenic operations on souls. The local figures in the world of Ooh can by choosing different developmental environments for the beings in their care, partially overwrite the cosmic operations. Tree Trunks did this for Sweet Pea. Finn did this partially for Fern by sitting with him in his death. Betty did this for Simon by being his witness. Princess Bubblegum, partially, has done this for Marceline by being her partner. The iatrogenic damage cannot be undone. The iatrogenic damage can, however, be partially attended to. And the attendance is the work that the show is willing to call meaningful. There is a final figure that has to be addressed before this essay can close. and he is the protagonist. Finn the human is the figure through whom the listener has been watching this entire iatrogenic catalogue unfold. Finn is, himself, an iatrogenic figure of multiple kinds. He is the soul of Shoko in a new body. He is the good half of a catalyst comet. He is the boy whose biological father, Martin Mertens, abandoned him to a multiversal prison without ever recognizing him. He is the boy whose adoptive parents, Joshua and Margaret, raised him alongside Jake without ever fully explaining to him the circumstances of his origin. He is the boy who picked up a cursed sword and let it grow into a separate person inside his body. He is the boy who lost his arm and grew a flower from the wound. He is the boy who, by the time the show ends, has carried more iatrogenic damage in a single body than almost any other figure in the program. And the show, by making him the protagonist, is making a quiet argument about what it means to be a person inside an iatrogenic universe. Finn is not exempt from the pattern. Finn is the pattern's primary site of expression. Every major arc the show conducts is, in some way, the arc of Finn's relationship to the various iatrogenic processes that have shaped him. The Citadel arc is about his relationship to his biological father. The Fern arc is about his relationship to a piece of himself he accidentally made into a person. The Grass Sword arc is about his relationship to a curse he absorbed and could not put down. The arc of his right arm is about the literal physical residue of all of these processes on his body. Finn does not escape the pattern. Finn just keeps living inside the pattern with as much dignity as he can manage. He attends. He witnesses. He sits with the people the pattern has damaged. He loses his arm and grows a flower from the wound and treats the flower as part of himself rather than as a defect. He keeps his memories of Fern and refuses to pretend Fern did not happen. He listens to Marceline when she tells him about Simon. He honors the dignity of Lemongrab's name when he speaks of him. He becomes, across the run of the show, the figure who has done the most attendance and the most witnessing of any character in OO, that is, in the show's quiet logic. What a hero is in an iatrogenic universe. A hero is not the person who fixes the damage. The damage cannot be fixed. A hero is the person who attends the damage with the seriousness of attention rather than the levity of dismissal. A hero is the person who sits with Fern while Fern dies. A hero is the person who walks Sweet Pea to the orchard. A hero is the person who, in the final scenes of the show's run, has accumulated enough attendance in his short life that the entire community of OO can call him, when he is mentioned, by his name. Sit with that for a moment. There is one more thing the show does before it ends, and it does it in the finale, an episode called Come Along With Me, which aired on the 3rd of September in the year 2018, and which the show treats as a single 44-minute event. The episode is many things. It is, among other things, the resolution of the iatrogenic argument that this essay has been tracing. The episode contains a sequence in which BMO sings a song called Time Adventure. The song was written by Rebecca Sugar, specifically for the finale, years after she left the show to make Steven Universe. The lyrics are simple. The song describes time as a thing that holds beings together, friends, family, the people one has loved, in ways that no individual being can fully understand. The song is, in some quiet way, the show's final answer to the iatrogenic question that it has been building toward across 10 seasons of runtime. The answer is this. The iatrogenic damage is real. The wounds cannot be undone. The makers who got it wrong cannot unmake. The cosmos, which is itself iatrogenic, will continue to produce new wounded persons across whatever future the show implies but does not depict. And the only thing any of these figures has against all of that damage is each other. The only thing any iatrogenic figure can hold on to in the face of a universe that has been producing iatrogenic figures from substances that did not consent to be divided, is the company of the other iatrogenic figures, in the present moment, in the time they have together. Time, the song says, is a thing they have. The song is sung by BMO, a designed object who became a person. The song is sung to a battlefield full of figures who have been about to kill each other. The song stops the battle. The song stops it not by force, but by reminding everyone present that the time they have together is the only resource any of them actually has, and that the experiment, whoever conducted it, did not include any guarantee of more. There is just now. There is just the people in the room. There is just the attendance one can offer to the wounded people in one's immediate vicinity. Princess Bubblegum kisses Marceline in that episode. The maker who has been performing surgical procedures on her own substance and on the substances of others her entire life. And the iatrogenic figure whose father designed her to be immortal and whose adoptive father lost his memory to a crown, choose, in the closing minutes of the show, to be partners with each other. The two figures in the show who have the most complicated relationships with the iatrogenic pattern decide, with full awareness of what they are choosing, that they are going to love each other inside the limits the pattern has set for them. They do not undo the damage. They do not pretend the damage is not there. They choose, instead, to perform the attendance for each other that the show has been arguing for 10 seasons is the only thing any of these figures has the power to offer. The kiss is small. The kiss is brief. The kiss is held by the show for slightly longer than a kiss would normally be held in a children's animated program. And the show, by holding it that way, is making the same argument it has been making the entire time. Attendance is the answer. Witnessing is the answer. Choosing to love a damaged person inside the limits of their damage is the answer. There is no other answer. There never was going to be another answer. And the show, having spent 10 years building the iatrogenic catalogue of ooh, finally lets the catalogue rest by showing what it looks like when two of its most extensively damaged members decide to authorize each other's continued existence with the smallest possible gesture of present tense love. Finn and Jake's bond is made permanent in the same finale. The show shows them, in flash forwards, growing old together. The show shows them, in flash forwards, dying and being remembered. The show shows the land of Ooh continuing without them and remembering them. The show is willing to let the protagonist die because the show has been arguing the entire time that the iatrogenic universe does not produce permanent solutions. It produces people. The people live for a while. The people attend each other. The people die. And the attendance the people perform for each other remains in the substance of the world after them, as a kind of accumulated tenderness that the next generation of iatrogenic figures will inherit when they emerge from the laboratories or the cosmic accidents that produce them. Sweet Pea, in the future, the finale implies, will keep growing up. BMO will keep being BMO. The Candy Kingdom will keep being run. Lemongrab is gone, but his population remains, and the population remembers something of what he was. Magic Man, the show implies, will keep performing his grief, and the show is willing to let him keep doing that, because the show does not insist that every iatrogenic figure must accept the cure. The pattern continues. The pattern is the universe, and the show is, in its closing minutes, willing to call the pattern beautiful, because the pattern is the only universe its characters have ever had, and inside the pattern, against all the odds the pattern itself imposes, the figures of Ooh have found ways to attend each other. That is what Adventure Time is about. That is the iatrogenic argument in its final form. Every character is a survivor of someone else's failed experiment. The show is the catalogue of the survivors. The catalogue is presented with the seriousness of damage and the tenderness of attendance. And the listener, who has been with the show for 10 seasons, or with this essay for a long, slow listen, is meant to come away with the understanding that the figures of Ooh are not exempt from the iatrogenic universe, but are, instead, its most patient inhabitants. Figures who have learned, through long centuries of practice, how to live with damage that cannot be undone, and how to witness each other anyway. The makers were inattentive. The damage was real. The damage is not fixable. The witnessing is the only available work. The witnessing is enough. The witnessing is, in the show's quiet logic, the entire point. There is a final image the show is willing to leave the listener with, and it is not the image of any one character. It is the image of the land of Ooh continuing without the protagonists in the long flash forward of the finale, where the show shows the world going on after Finn and Jake have grown old and died. The tree fort is still there. The Candy Kingdom is still there. The figures who survived the protagonists are still there. Sweet Pea is older. Marceline is the same age she always was. Princess Bubblegum is still ruling. BMO, having outlived almost everyone, is sitting on the porch of the tree fort with a small new companion who has taken up residence there in the absence of the original inhabitants. The world is iatrogenic. The world keeps going. The world has, inside it, the accumulated tenderness of every act of attendance any of these figures has ever performed for any of the others. The damage that began in Princess Bubblegum's laboratory, in the wreckage of Brooklyn, in the catalyst comet that split before recorded history, has been partially metabolized by 1,000 small acts of witnessing performed across the 10 seasons of the show. The metabolizing is not complete. The damage is not gone. The world is, however, slightly more livable than it was at the start of the show, because the figures who lived through the run of the program added small layers of attendance onto the substrate of the universe they were given. That is what the show was about. That is what the figures of Ooh were doing across 10 years of runtime. Every one of them was an iatrogenic survivor of someone else's failed experiment. And every one of them was, in their own way and at their own pace, performing the work of attending each other through the damage that the experiments had caused. The work was small. The work was patient. The work was, when summed up, the entire point of a children's animated program that almost no other children's animated program of its era was willing to attempt. Adventure Time, in the end, was a 10-year argument that the only available response to an iatrogenic universe is the practice of attendance, and that the practice of attendance is not a small thing, but the entire substance of what it means to be a person inside a universe that did not consent to produce you and cannot unproduce you, and can only, at its best, be inhabited with the kind of patient witnessing that the figures of Ooh demonstrated. episode after episode, across 10 years of the most quietly philosophical animation any major network ever broadcast. The show is over, the figures are at rest, the catalogue is complete, and the iatrogenic universe that produced them continues. In the implied future, the finale gestures toward to produce more figures who will, in their own time, perform their own attendance, and who will, in the end, leave behind their own small layers of tenderness on the substrate of a world that has never figured out how to stop producing wounded persons, and has, instead, learned how to be one of the only places in any animated cosmos where the wounded persons are taken seriously as persons. That is adventure time. That is what it was always about. The makers were not careful. The cosmos was not careful. The figures who survived the makers and the cosmos were, however, careful with each other. And that care, in the show's quiet logic, was the thing the entire 10-year project was patiently building toward. The catalogue is complete. The names have been read. The wounds have been described. The attendance has been performed in this small way by the act of having listened to the catalogue from one end to the other. That is also, in the show's logic, a piece of the same work the show was doing the entire time. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.